So this video is for IT 380. We're going to be in week 2 of sprint 2. Sorry, my lecture videos for week 1 got brief. There's probably about 50 minutes for the 2. But some things, long story short, the baby's having eating issues, it happened. So anyway, I gave you some reading chapters because I wanted you to start. I was going to introduce the interaction reading chapters a week later, but since the lecture videos got cut short, I moved them up. And so anyway, you had like almost close to an hour of lecture videos, and you had the 2 chapters. I want to start thinking about what are interactions from a human to a computer. How can you think about designing them or evaluating them? So this is giving you frameworks and how to conceptualize interactions, and then how to start thinking about putting them together in user interfaces, are the interface, the connection point from your program to the user, and most of the time it's graphical, it's visual, it's on the monitor. So we call them GUIs, or graphical user interfaces. But a user interface can have elements of sound and haptics, or touch events, or voice commands. So just know that interfaces from a user to a computer doesn't always have to be graphical. It's just a majority of them, overwhelming majority, is graphical. So in any case, we'll be doing that. The user uses an input device like the mouse and keyboard or a touch screen, game controller to place commands through the interface that basically just call methods on your code, and your backend gets changed and the information gets updated back to the user, usually in visual and audio. So there's some readings for you, and I just wrote out the design doc here. So here we are in week 2. We got week 3, week 4. I'm definitely gonna end up moving these readings up a little bit, but they're there. And then that last week of just wrapping up, and then here's your deadline. All right. So if I click on the design assignment, the gist of it is that in sprint 1, you did your research document. Now you're going to be working on your design document, and you're going to complete another major section of your prototype. I'm still kind of on the fence if it's going to be at level 1 or the tutorial part. I'm pretty sure it's going to be level 1, but let me just start doing the videos and let me start jumping into the project. And I kind of went through and just like read all my code. And when you leave projects, especially for more than like a month, you like forget a lot about it, so you have to come back. So it's really important that you have good naming conventions, and your code is straightforward and easy to read, and that you have comments, and because it's like opening up a book and halfway, in the middle of the story, and you haven't read the story in several months, and you kind of forgot everything that's going on, or watching your favorite show, but picking it up halfway through, and you basically forgot everything. So code is very much like that. So anyway, I read through my project, and I was thinking of, oh wow, we're gonna have some fun for the rest of this semester, because I have a lot of code to go through. I forgot how quite expansive this project is. When you play the WebGL build of it, it feels rather simple, but then when you dive into the code, I remember that it's quite lengthy. But in any case, you do your design doc, and I'm thinking you do level 1 and the tutorial last, but I'm going to start doing lecture videos, and you'll follow me. And for those where all this is completely new, you're going to be just following my lecture videos and writing the code and just learning C# and Unity and user interfaces and 3D as much as you can, but you'll be completing the bubble sort trainer, the WebGL version of it. And because of that, I'm not going to create a design document for bubble sort as a sample, because that would kill the point for those students who are doing that direction. That you still have to create your own design document, even though you're following along with the coding of myself. And for those who are doing your own projects, you still create your own design document and you write your own code. And in the very least, if you feel that comfortable, I'm sure you'll find with generating your own prototype. And even if you hit roadblocks, you can come into tutorial time or lab time, and we can simplify. We can always try to find the solutions to your coding problem. And if we do discover that your coding problem is a little too complex for the class, then we can always reduce and simplify the features. In worst case, if your whole project just ends into that, train right into the mountainside situation, which sometimes it does, and that's okay. It's a learning experience. Then you will fall back into my project, so we have our safety nets. So that being said, I am providing the binary counting design document. So this link just comes over here. I was kind of going through this document last week, and I kind of looked at the sections, and I really tried to just cherry pick what's most important for you guys to focus on and learn about. So the overview, we're going to grab that from your research document. You've already generated, it's great. You definitely, if your ideas change, which that's completely acceptable, that happens a lot at this phase, you can just change these little sections in the overview, what have you. But we're going to have a bit of the overview that you'll provide. And then next up is that executive summary. So I talked about how the executive summary is like the elevator pitch. It's your 15 seconds to get your point across to a high-level person. So in this case, it's a 1 to 2 paragraphs summarizing the importance, the goals, the ideas of your project. Now, usually that's the last section that you complete. So normally throughout these next few weeks, you're going to be finishing these. And then toward the end, that last week, once all your sub-ideas, all the details of your project are in a happy state, you've edited them a few times over and you're happy, then you start pulling the high-level ideas from each of these sections, and that's how you build your executive summary. It summarizes everything else. It's that summary statement. I can read it, I can understand your whole doc even before I jump into your doc. All right, I moved learning objectives up. In this document, it was a little bit lower. It was beneath the design objectives. And you see here it's above. So learning objectives really are the first point of entry into the educational technology design. So we're going to do that first. And probably the video after this, I'm going to do a little exercise of how to find other lessons or learning activities online of your material, and how to kind of boil down or kind of distill out the learning objectives from them for your own project. But the learning objectives summarize. In this section, you're going to summarize the core learning objectives in a bullet list, and then you're going to explain all the learning objectives in more detail in 1 to 2 paragraphs. So ours are about it must be fun to learn, environments are aesthetic. I'm actually going to, in the next video, I'm going to show you how to get a little bit more detail in there. And what I mean by learning objectives is a little different than how they're talked about here. So as we were generating all the documents and all the materials, as you'll notice, it's very hard to do as you're developing a project. It's an overhead, but it's worth doing. But if you're ever like following your favorite game studios or developers and you're following their dev blog, you can notice that things are spotty or messy, and it's not the core of their activities, and so it's hard to keep everything up to date so that everyone, like the public, is aware of what they're working on. So the same thing was happening with us. We were generating these portfolio sites and getting these design docs up, but we had done a lot of the work, and we were just kind of trying to piece everything together so that we could come back to these projects later. We could remember what we were doing. The point is that the learning objectives I'm going to have you do is, now that we kind of generate our documents and I've had time to reflect, I'm thinking that these there's a way to make learning objectives much more impactful for you to understand how to make your design docs. So I'll go through it with like binary count, or I'll probably do binary count, so that I'm not stepping on people's toes who are doing bubble sort. But it's almost like a sequence of learning steps. So for binary counting, it's how to decipher the zeros and ones, how to put them in a sequence from right to left and not left to right, to how to know which numbers they represent, how to add them up. So there's a few steps you have to do to learn how to binary count, and that's what the learning objectives are. So in either case, I'm going to state them in a bullet list, and then you kind of talk about them cohesively in a holistic manner in the paragraph below. So we kind of do talk about what the objectives are and how we're approaching students with these learning concepts. And this is a good step in the right direction. But and so it's okay to talk about the learning objectives the way that we did here, kind of in a higher level, like how we're trying to solve some learning problems, how we're trying to make this material more approachable. But what I really going to want here is a list of steps of how to learn something. Let me just put that thought on hold for the next video. All right, design objectives. A bullet list of your core design objectives. So basically, how are you using this ed tech to solve some learning problems? Tell me about it. Let's boil them down to a bullet list. So you have some core design directives that you can always look at quickly when you're making some decisions to know how you should be guiding your interaction designs. So same process. Give me a bullet list, explain them more in detail, 1 to 2 paragraphs. So a lot of this kind of higher level stuff is kind of crossing the border over to design objectives, because if you read up here and then if you read here, you'll see how they're kind of very similar. And so that's because this stuff bullet listed here is more like designy objectives than learning objectives. So anyway, we want to use the free roaming abilities of the Oculus Quest to serve the purpose of getting kids to move around, because when they sit down, they're really bored. We want to try different learning styles. Our learning styles is kind of getting out of date, the terminology, like learning preferences. Do you like to see something? Do you like to hear something? Do you like to have your hands holding something as you're learning about it? So create enthusiasm for learning computer science, increase engagement factors by having both logical and creative outlets for the child. And yes, the left brain, right brain argument or description of how we think is also having some evidence put against it, but I still think it's a reputable way to talk about the way people think. So that's why I have design objectives coming next after learning objectives, because once you state out, okay, I'm going to teach this lesson. This lesson has parts that people must learn to understand the whole lesson. So learning objectives kind of state the parts of the lesson. Then the design objectives come next, in my opinion, and they're saying that, this is what I'm aiming for my user to learn. How am I going to design my piece of software, design my interactive experience to achieve this learning? So I'm going to make sure it's fun. I'm going to make sure it's engaging. I'm tailored toward a younger audience. I'm going to make sure everything is bright and vibrant, has a lot of colors and a lot of motion. Or I'm tailoring it toward an older crowd. And so I want there to be a little bit more nuanced or a slow progression of more deeper ideas, or however, this is where you start thinking about your persona and what's the best way to present this material. How are you going to design this experience, the interactions, the graphics, the motion? What's the point? All right, and so core mechanics, 1-2 paragraphs explain the core loops. So what the main interactions are the player's always engaged in. So when you think about games, the core mechanics, or when you think about the core mechanics, I said for me it was the station, but you can just, for you it's going to be something else. For bubble count, it was these stations, these kiosks. What are the core mechanics? What are we always going back to? So if it's an RPG, it's all about like investing your time and emotional energies into building a character, because you're always with that, guiding that character, fighting with that character, buying items for that character, leveling up that character. If it's a platformer, that core mechanics are that feeling of the hand controls, the quick hand response and jumping. If it's a quiz game, the core mechanics are that the curiosity and the fun in solving logic or vocabulary-based puzzles aids this learning. If it's an exploration game or a map game, that you're always finding stuff and revealing stuff on the map to find the next thing. That's the main mechanic. What's your user always going back to as they're using your experience? In this case, they're always using the stations. I think there's no point in this experience that nothing is involving the station. You're looking at the next station. You're interacting with a station. You're bringing something from one station to another. You're thinking about how you need to solve the task station as you're working on the number station. Everything is connecting. It's a connecting tissue. What is the user always looping on? Their thoughts are always looping on. In this case, it's the stations. So interaction design. Explain how your interactions are learnable, memorable, and accessible. I think I might move this up. Types. I think I'm going to move types of interactions up a spot. So types of interactions. A bullet list of the types of interactions that compose your experience from macro level at the game level state, the middle level, like a task state level, a task size, and the micro level, the actual UI elements that they're interacting with. So if I come down here, types of interactions. All right. So in this case, the binary count level, the micro, the smallest thing is you're always pulling levers. So I used to have buttons too and dials, but whatever you're constantly clicking, touching, sliders, drop downs, buttons. Maybe the user is always left clicking just the mouse cursor in a spot in a location. It's just that mouse click. What is the most smallest thing that the user is always looping on, always thinking on? And it's usually some type of UI element. But since this was a 3D VR game, it's a 3D lever that they're pulling up and down. And yes, you can categorize micro. I think this is going to be in a future chapter, but triggers, how to trigger an action from a user, how to cue a user, give them information of what they're allowed to do, behaviors, actions, modes. So I think there's another a later reading. But the middle interaction design, so this is from the binary counting, the next stage up, besides levers and dials and buttons and readouts, we have the whole station. So that's the middle level. So this is kind of encapsulates a lot of the micro stuff summed up in a middle state. It doesn't contain the whole level, and it's a level broken down in nice ways. And for this situation, it's the stations. So in a lot of the educational software, you give them a series of tasks that get more complicated. So you teach them something. The whole level is about learning one big concept. And to grow the user's knowledge of that concept, you start really simple, and then you get a little bit harder until you're really testing them if they understand the concept. So that's why I was thinking it's more the middle interactions can be focused more on the tasks. So each of my levels had like 7 tasks. And the first one is so easy, it's like you can't fail it. The second one's a little bit harder, and so on until the last one, the 7th one, is pretty hard. And so it's a nice ramp up. And the users are, again, they're in that learn, practice, demonstrate loop as they're doing it. And they're involved in that task at the moment. So that's why the middle level is involved in the task, or in this case, this is a physical object station. You know, it can be more literal, it can be more of an idea, but what's something in between your entire level and the smallest thing is like a UI element. So what's like a middle ground? And then the macro level, what's your biggest interaction design? So in this case, the whole system, the whole level, so all the stations in the room, everything all together, that's the macro level. Or the 7 tasks all together, the major learning objective. So how at the macro level are you designing this experience? And so these can just be all bullet lists. And then I think once you get all that information out, then you're ready to talk about the interaction design, because you kind of defined a lot of the higher level stuff. Now just write a paragraph or 2 explaining how your interactions are learnable, memorable, accessible. So those are the core features of interaction design. They're learnable. You can approach them. You can approach an interface without knowing anything about the interface. You can learn how to use it, and then you can use it. It's just learnable. So memorable, meaning it's kind of ingrained on your memory. There's something unique about it, catchy. It's easy to return back to your interface. It's easy to return back to your program and just pick up the little lost nuggets of knowledge, to learn, relearn the little small parts. But a lot of it is still ingrained in your muscle memory or what have you, and it's quick to come back to. It's memorable. And then accessible. It's easy to use. It's very accessible for everybody. So if I move up here, we have learnability and how we did it here. We made it learnable. How did we make it memorable? And how did we make it accessible? And you notice how there's like just a short little paragraph for each. All right. And so I say just 1 and 2 for all 3. But as long as you just talk about how you've approached your interaction design as far as it's learnable, it's memorable, and it's accessible. And so this all together is going to be your design doc that will be in 4 weeks or whatever we're at right now. So let me just go down. Yeah, 11/8. So it looks like 3 weeks. So if you'll watch this on Monday, you have 1, 2, and 3. So we have 3 weeks to finish the sprint. All right. So that concludes going over the design assignment. The only thing I'm going to do after this video is I'm just going to bring this up a level and have this be at the end, because this kind of follows everything else. All right, and then I'm going to move on to talking about learning objectives.